We are back. We hope you are doing well, everyone. It's another episode of the RomaPress podcast. As per usual, thank you to all of our patrons over at Patreon. If you would like to join, patreon.com/RomaPress and at RomaPress, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook is where you can find us on social media. Hopefully, everybody has calmed down a bit from the derby. Andy and myself are both under the weather today, so we are going to keep this one relatively short, probably 25 to 30 minutes, which is the ideal time for a podcast length when it comes to anything transfer market related. Andy, going any longer than that, and we are just doing filler, and you essentially become the audio version of Tutto Mercato Web, which if you just go to their landing page, a homepage on their website, it is every 15 seconds a new story
because
appears.
it's ChatGPT.
Yes, it is.
I think they even got caught. Like someone just screenshotted the fact that they had failed to omit the instruction for ChatGPT used in an article. So they published the article plus the instruction for ChatGPT, which sounded akin to something like write the same article as before, but more creatively.
Which would be fantastic, because I am convinced if you look at some of their writers' names, and I only poke fun at them. It is in total kindness, because I do know one of their editors, and he's a very nice guy. I am convinced, though, much like our friend Marco Violi, I pointed this out, I think in 2016 or 2017, I think they make up names they create imaginary writers to attribute articles to, because some of the names are, it's one thing to be Italian, and then there's another thing to be, Marco Pene or something like that. Just so out of this Italian, to the point where, we're getting into the territory of, like full trash Italiano.
But that's what the transfer market does. No, I mean, it just forces everybody. I mean, right now everybody is chasing for that exclusive. Everybody's chasing for the latest rumor. Everybody's refreshing. I mean, it's nonstop. We live in an age where this period of time plus the summer becomes really unbearable, because you really just live from second to second with new names popping up. Thankfully, Roma haven't been on the receiving end of this kind of treatment so much right now, except maybe for a few, some news regarding Le Fee's transfer, or who the next striker backup will be once Eldor Shomurodov leaves. But aside from that, it's been relatively calm so far, and I hope that it continues to do so. Although I know that today Florent Ghisolfi took a plane to Milan. There is the Serie A assembly going on there, but then obviously we all know that in Milan it's where all the agents, all the sporting directors, they meet at the hotels to discuss, to talk, to negotiate, to inquire, and that's definitely a sign that we're gonna see a lot more rumors popping up in the next few hours, next few days.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, as you said, this period is so chaotic, much like the summer. The only issue is you have to get a summer's length of transfer rumors condensed into just a couple of weeks. And this is something that we also warned people of. We do it every single January, and it hardly ever matters. But we'll say it again just for posterity's sake, because we do it every January. Not doing so, it would get us off balance and out of our state of homeostasis. Put your expectations for the January transfer market below ground level. You should be the Earth's core, essentially, in terms of your expectation. They should be so low, because again, when it comes to the January transfer market, there are best case scenarios and worst case scenarios. When it comes to Roma, The best case scenario, as we all know, and we say it as many times as we can when it comes to this period of the winter transfer window, the golden standard of a winter transfer market is getting somebody who is adapted to Serie A and can come in, contribute, and make an impact immediately. And the gold standard, as we all know, 2015, 2016, when what? We get Perotti, El Shaarawy, and the man that hardly ever gets mentioned, Ervin Zukanovic, who I believe made 3 to 4 total appearances, the left-footed monster, the Bosnian beast, who was who left just as quickly as he arrived at Roma. But that is a gold standard. And as we all know, on the opposite end of that, the worst, most pitiful, the the emergency situation, I guess, standard, the worst possible scenario, the worst possible outcome is your favorite, the man, the myth, the legend, the man who went. I think he had more hairstyles than he did actual appearances at Roma. Jonathan Silva, who, if you can guess right now, I didn't Google before this, but if you are able to guess, Andy, where he currently plays football,
I only
we have to
followed
give you
his
some sort of a
career
prize.
all the way until I think he was either in Alaves or Leganes, but he was somewhere in Spain, and then he was rocking that Rastafarian haircut, you know. But aside from that, I lost him completely off my radar. I still remember those 60 minutes played against Empoli. That was it. That was his entire contribution. Um, that was Jonathan Silva, impact on Roma in a situation that really called for some major reinforcements on the left. That's who we got. We got Jonathan Silva. So if one looks at recent transfer windows in January, well, I would argue that the first January with Mourinho, where we get Sergio Oliveira and everybody is so skeptical about him, turned out quite well for us, to the point that
Yes.
people were even disappointed when he left at the end of the season. And then I actually argue, and I did argue that last year was when Roma went out of their way to secure Angelino and Tommaso Baldanzi, two very different players, one more experienced, another one young, up and coming with huge Serie A potential. I said that you have to consider that a success for a club like Roma to go out of their way and secure Baldanzi for 15 million, and Angelino, who turned out to be a good option, perhaps not a great option, but he's good, and he allowed you to save money on a position where you normally spend a hell of a lot more than 5 million, which is what we
Yes.
paid for him in the summer. That's all you can ask for if you're Roma, and that's what I will be asking for this January. We know that Roma are looking for players. Claudio Ranieri has said it. Ghisolfi has said it. Roma will definitely sign a couple of players, if not three. It remains to be seen if they really want to replace Enzo Le Fee, if they will find a stronger option than Shomurodov to serve as backup to Artem Dovbyk, and then this right back that we've been hearing so much about. That is also crucial because someone like Zekiseli cannot play every single game. Saud, we all know his limitations. So it takes very little to give this team a bit of extra fresh air, but it is crucial because at some point you'll start playing every 3 days. At some point
Yes.
you will be playing 3 games per week. That's the thing, and we know how that goes for Roma. We know how bad that can turn if you don't strengthen the team accordingly. So these are the days, when, of course, if you get a rumor saying Davide Frattesi is close to Roma, and then you hear, well, Inter are asking for 45 million euros, you have to start wondering, who is building the narrative, because there is no way in hell that Roma could take out 45 million euros in January. In the summer, it's already difficult to fathom, and it took Roma a huge effort to secure Artem Dovbyk for the kind of price tag that he had on him. Let alone in January, where you are working with limited funds, and when the team is playing. So it really, January is problematic, not only because nobody really wants to sell in January, but also because the team is playing. So strategies can shift. Last
Yes.
year, Roma's entire transfer strategy in January shifted because Daniele De Rossi came in. So in a matter of 2 weeks, Roma had to figure out a completely different new market for a completely new manager. And thankfully, this year, Ranieri is here. He supposedly know what he wants. The Roma are on a good streak, so at least you don't have that headache, that bad black cloud hanging over your head. But still, it is time for Roma to address, definitely certain shortcomings that have been there, and it would be a mistake to not secure additional depth. For example, CEO Enzo Le Fee is leaving, or Eldor Shomurodov is leaving, and not replace accordingly. Even players who have gotten 0 minutes must be replaced at some point.
Well, let's go. You mentioned some of them already, but let's go through some of the areas that they actually need, because I don't think, when you have the sample size that we do by now, Roma's shortcomings, their departments in which they are lacking some names, are very, very clear. The position in which they lack depth, it's obvious at this point. Where there are upgrades, we all know the names by now. Now, obviously, with January, I always argue this is, very rarely are you going to get a guy that immediately walks into the starting 11, makes an impact, contributes immediately, and is flying from the moment they land. The name I always point to is Seydou Bumbia, who everybody got excited about. I remember at the time, even I got dragged into. I have to admit, I got dragged into a bit of the hype for the guy. His agent, who I still talk to every now and then, I will never forget the conversations with him. He was updating me on the entire transfer saga with CSKA Moscow. And oh my gosh, this guy, he's been flying in Russia. Now he's going to come and bring his game to Serie A. He's going to be great. Believe he ended his time at Roma with 2 goals, one of which I know for a fact is against Sassuolo, which I will never forget. And I remember in a summer friendly, he tried to do um, a very funny penalty shot, which it, it was almost as if he was trying to emulate Totti, but he ended up emulating, I don't know, pick a meme of a
I
footballer.
don't I don't think he has fond memory. I think he's one of those players that has basically no fond memories of Roma. I think this is a player who has done everything to distance himself from Roma. I think as soon as that initial Roma spell was over and he was out. Like this is a player that if you look on his socials or whatever, there's no sign, there's no trace of his past at Roma for sure. Like this is a guy that doesn't sit down at a family table and says, "Remember when I was at Roma?" Like, definitely, this guy did everything to wipe that memory from his head. So, no, of course, you don't want someone like him. But again, you know, you don't really have to do much. You just have to replace Enzo Le Fee,
No.
who hardly played, didn't play at all, basically under Claudio Ranieri, and you have to replace Eldor Shomurodov, who has what, 2 goals this season, and hasn't done really much to impress since his return from Cagliari. And then you have to find a player who can rotate, not even replace Zelik in the starting lineup, but just rotate across competitions. That's all. So the requirements are fairly low. My expectations are low, but the requirements are really low.
They are very low too. Again, we have been through the highs, the lows in terms of the January transfer market. But you have to set your expectations at the bare minimum, essentially a body with a beating heart that arrives is a plus for the most part. I agree with you in the sense of Angelino. As far as last January is concerned, I mean, that has worked out about as well as anybody could have envisioned. You get a player who is unwanted by multiple clubs. He goes to Galatasaray, doesn't work out there. His parent club, RB Leipzig, they're looking to offload him. They want to get rid of him. He eventually winds up at Roma in a deal that even
Yeah, option to
18
buy
months prior.
for 5 million. So that's, I
Yes,
mean, as it gets, as it doesn't get any better than that for a starter. And that's who Angelino
absolutely.
has become for Roma, whether you like it or not. I can see that some people can criticize him. I think he definitely has that fatigue syndrome of a player who's been relied too much upon, kind of like Kolarov. No, it's he
Yes,
started
yes.
off the season really strong. Even when Roma were doing bad, he was one of the better players. The problem is that after some time, he loses steam. You don't have someone to replace him with, so he has to play every game. But for 5 million, a starter, come on.
Yeah, you can't beat that. I mean, the value that Roma got in Angelino is about as ideal as you could hope for in January. Again, unrivaled by nearly every single January in which we have been doing this. The only one eclipsing it is obviously 2015, 2016, when you get two attackers that arrive and make an immediate impact. And I mean, the rest is history from there as far as the success that they had at Roma. But what the January market does is it sort of gives you that extra body. I know that is such an elementary way or even a nonsensical way of wording it, but bodies are something that Roma actually need at this time. Somebody, even of a Serie B level, can contribute when you're playing, in this packed calendar. Let's remember.
Absolutely, but that's
The,
John. But that's why you're giving away Enzo Le Fee, because here's an investment of 23 million euros sitting on the bench. Clearly, it doesn't have a future with Ranieri, so you cannot keep him there. You have to, if you're gonna replace him with, you might as well replace him with a body, but a body that gets those extra 10, 15 minutes. Clearly, someone like Enzo Le Fee, who came to be a starter at Roma, will not
yes.
work in the long run if you're just going to give him scraps. That's the thing. You were giving him scraps, and you can't do that with someone you invested 23 million euros in.
You absolutely can't. I mean, when it comes to Roma, this is something where you have to make a decision quickly. I have argued for years now that Roma, one of their biggest mistakes, and one of the obviously financially at least, there's a bevy of issues as to how they ended up in this position where they needed Dan and Ryan Friedkin to not only be the savior, but to throw in piles of cash into the club. You got into this position, at least from a player trading point of view, because I think you were unwilling to move on from guys quickly enough. You were sort of holding on for the sake of holding on, or for the sake of accounting purposes and amortization purposes. Let's remember, 23 million, 5 years contract. That's just under an amortization rate of 5 million, let's say 4.75 per season. I mean, this is, and that is, by the way, only the transfer fee itself. That's, of course, disregarding the wages. This is something, if we want to criticize Gisolfi, now, this, when analyzing this thing of Enzo Le Fee, you obviously have to take it with the nuance of, well, he arrived during Daniele De Rossi's era. He was the first to arrive, by the way. He was purchased specifically for Daniele De Rossi. He was the guy in the profile that Roma and De Rossi were seeking. He wanted the type of midfielder who can do the mezzala, can be a creative force, can sort of
and
be an
and to pair him
alternative.
up with Manu Kone, who came
Yes,
at the very end of the
yes,
window. And then
correct.
what happens to Enzo Le Fee after he starts for Roma against Cagliari, puts a decent shift in, plays in the second match against Empoli, which Roma lose, and then what happens? He gets injured and he's
He
out
gets
for
injured,
over
yes.
a month, and that basically takes him out. Once Juric is back, Roma are in a terrible shape, terrible situation, and Enzo Le Fee is utilized then. That's when he's utilized at Roma's worst. At Roma's worst moment, that's when Enzo Le Fee is given free reign, and he's given repeated starts alongside Manu Kone. It seems like Juric has decided on this midfield duo in order to carry
Yes.
De Rossi's legacy. The problem is that it coincides with Roma's worst spell of the season. So once Ranieri is here, guess what? Enzo Le Fee back to the bench, and he stayed there. I think his only minutes with Ranieri in charge came against Como, and that's
Yes.
about it. So you just and both Roma and the player could not afford to be in this situation. I was actually taken aback by the fact that he accepted the championship. That's quite an odd move. Like that's quite not the type of destination that you imagine a player of his caliber and a player who moved to Roma for the kind of fee that he moved to. That's not a destination that you envision for him. But I do think that Roma made the best out of this deal, as in this is the best they could get from Sunderland. The loan that will his entire salary will be covered, and then there is an option that becomes mandatory if Sunderland are
Promoted.
promoted to the Premier League. I believe they're fourth with like 2 points from the top. So,
Yeah, three
you know,
points from top. So
okay,
very, very doable.
it's
Very
there, right?
doable.
It's there. It's
Yes.
very good. So that's as good as Roma could do in this situation, which is not a situation that you want to find yourself in. Let's remember, no club wants to be looking to sell a player that they just bought 6 months ago. It doesn't happen that way.
No, it doesn't. And if we want to, or others want to be critical of Gisolfi and this operation, obviously, you're going to find very little that can be defended in terms of this deal, considering the guy amortized 2.5 million euros. You're going to have to get at least around 2021 to ensure you do not have a minusvalenza. Now, just to remind everybody, when we say that word, capital loss, capital gain, minusvalenza, plusvalenza, I know everybody knows this by now, but in case any, some new listeners or those perhaps unfamiliar with the transfer market, if you pay 10 for a guy, in 3 years, if you sell him for 9, some people still view that as a loss of 1. Like, oh, they lost out on the deal. No, it doesn't work like that. You do take the player's contract length, divide it over the fee that you pay for him with the wages. That's the rate at which he amortizes. And given that, if you do want to criticize Gisolfi for the operation in the summer to bring Le Fee, I do think you have to give him credit for this one, man, because to find a buyer, as you said, an operation like this for a guy with what he has shown this season, which he was good. Even good might be a bit of a stretch. I thought he was positive.
I think he was getting
in
there. This
Yeah.
is. I mean, there is no chance that you can deem him a failure. As in, you can't say that
No,
he's a
no.
bad player. I just think that this is a guy who came in, had perhaps a hard time to had a lot of catching up to do to match Serie A's physicality. Maybe that took him a bit of time to recover after the injury because of that. And then after the injury, he needed to get reacclimated. But as soon as he started to get those consistent minutes that he was supposed to get when he signed for Roma, his playing time was completely cut by Ranieri. And that's by no means Ranieri's fault. Ranieri came in, saw that the team needs someone else in the midfield to resolve the situation they were in, And guess what? I mean, he started to bench the likes of Pellegrini and Cristante as well. So this
Yes.
is not an Enzo Le Fee problem. Enzo Le Fee is just the kind of guy that you can still get something out of right now. And I do believe that he has his chance to make his stay in the championship permanent. I do think that he can do well there. This was definitely just another symptom of how Roma have been all over the place this season. You know, this kind of deal is the embodiment of what went wrong for Roma. Just a mismatch of ideas and a terrible first half to the season.
You are absolutely spot on. This is merely the fallout from when you have something like Roma have had this season in terms of you go through an entire preseason, you have your manager sign a new contract. It looks as if, okay, this is the path forward. This is a project we are sticking with. And you make obviously Roma are doing well now. The thing with Juric, we can call the decision brash, incorrect. About De Rossi, everybody will have their individual opinion on that. But whether you think that decision was incorrect or the right one, you're going to have fallout from it. You are going to have guys that are still in the squad that were purchased strictly for Daniele De Rossi. I mean, Andy, look at poor Sule, man. That guy for months, I was going to say weeks, but months, was speaking personally to Daniele De Rossi. And you want to talk about another guy that you can't even give him a rating or a grade. It's incomplete. We don't have anything to judge him on. Much like Le Fee, we have a handful
Why?
of
Because
matches.
you think Saud, you think Dal, they wouldn't be playing if Roma had at least built some consistency from the start. You don't think that Tommaso Baldanzi and Sule would be making more appearances if Roma were in a position where they could take such risks? Because let's face it, you know, giving the team into the hands of youngsters is always a risk, but it's a
Of
risk
course.
when you're willing to take it, when you're in a position that allows you to take it. Roma are not in that position. That's why they have to rely on Paredes. That's why they have to rely on 36-year-old Mats Hummels. Because you need clear answers. You can't have question marks. Unfortunately, too many of these pieces that we got in the summer were put in a context where they just were never going to succeed. Right from the get-go, it just was written in the stars.
No, it wasn't. And this is something where when it comes to the transfer market, when you are in the position that you are that Roma have, we all know again they're still under the restrictions of financial fair play. They are still having to work within certain parameters, so they can't go out no matter how much cash Dan Friedkin. He can come with €1 billion to the table, slap it down, and say, "I want A, B, and C player." It doesn't matter. Okay, they are under restriction by UEFA, and this is something that this is the reality of the situation. They have to live with it. But when it comes to just this part of the calendar, you have the market, and now officially we begin the second half of the season. Now, how much of an impact the January transfer market has on the actual forecast or outlook that everybody has for the remaining months of the season, I question that. I don't think if you think Roma can finish still within a European place, if they bring in some other guy that we know Roma will likely bring in, an alternative who can come off the bench and contribute at not even a high level, just a level that is not a massive drop off, that can keep you afloat. That is something where once you tailor your expectations correctly for the winter transfer market, I think we're at least able to have a balanced view as to how this Roma moves forward for the rest of the season. Now, given that, I don't know how to judge this team still, because you have just a few weeks ago, as happy as I am after the derby, and this is really a symptom of the environment, right? I mean, we go from Lorenzo Pellegrini being talked about, he's leaving in the summer, he's going to Napoli, or he's going to Inter, comes in the derby, has a good performance, and it's almost like, whoosh, All of that disappeared. Funny how that works. And by
Yeah.
the way, you
Now,
called that.
now he's supposed to stay at least until June, and then there is even talk of a renewal. I mean, it's so predictable, John. It's
Wow.
I could
Wow.
do this in my sleep,
Yes.
and there are some actual people that wake up and they get paid by an editor to write that stuff, to they have agents to consult, they come
Yes.
up with these stories that anybody can see from miles and miles away. Lorenzo Pellegrini now is the savior of Rome. Lorenzo Pellegrini now is going to start every single match for Roma because he had a good performance in the derby.
Correct. Anybody who has spent even the slightest, the slightest amount of time surrounding Roma, following Roma, the ambiente Roma, you saw this coming from a mile away. And the moment you saw that ball hit the back of the net from the foot of Pellegrini, we all knew what some of the headlines were going to be. In fact, we knew what some of the questions following the match were going to be to Ranieri. They were all going to be about Pellegrini. And this is why, by the way, Roma so often find themselves in this position of often being the bridesmaid and not the bride. Such a low and inconsistent sort of self-awareness, this self-esteem that is high and then low and then high and then low, sometimes thinking you're much bigger than you are and then being at the bottom, oh my gosh, Serie B stuff. There is never any sort of, let's take a breath and calm and have a balanced outlook on this. That very rarely happens, which is why, again, you see Pellegrini go from 0 to hero in less than 24 hours. So because of that, you have this thing where, oh my gosh, the first half of the season was crap. But I do think, Andy, there's some of the people in the group chat, they were trying to sort of lay out a path to potentially challenging top 4. No, can we be calm
first let's get a win, our second win in a row, please. First let's win against Bologna, because I don't know about you, John, but I have this incredible feeling that I've had all season long. Whenever we win a game, I feel completely prepared for anything, in terms of I'm ready to lose against Bologna. Like
Yes.
This team has instilled in me a certain fear this season that makes me completely not confident in their chances of winning a match away from home against Bologna after getting a derby victory. That's how bad things are, in the sense that this team has done good things under Ranieri, but they haven't done enough. And the derby has to count as just 3 points. That's it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't go beyond that. You're going to Bologna. You have a problem because you haven't won an away match since April. Get your shit together. Win a second game in a row. Then we can start talking about the third game in a row. But right now, Roma have one win in 2025, and if you lose against Bologna, then that one win will not have given you anything more than just that 3 points. That's it, and the hope of turning things around. But if you don't make use of this opportunity, if you don't use this momentum to your advantage, then forget about it. Then it's useless.
It would be useless, and it would be quintessential Roma, by the way, to lose to Como, go pound, turn things around, or give the appearance of things sort of getting back onto track against Parma, dismantling them, going to San Siro, putting in a good shift, being the better of the two sides, leaving there with what should have been victory, going out in the derby, hammering Lazio, only to take all of that, throw it into the bin, and lose to Bologna. A Bologna side that, by the way, anytime it comes to a team managed by the bald-headed one, this guy who's somehow losing 2 European finals in a row, 2 European finals in a row, is given, in essence, a promotion to a Champions League side. It is beyond my comprehension. It is beyond my understanding, but it is it is very typical of Italian football to do that. This, yes, they beat Roma at the Olimpico. This is not a good Bologna by any stretch. They were so it was so much better under Thiago Motta, I should say. I don't think I'm breaking any news there. But when it comes to Italiano, this guy is so clueless, so lucky. As we often say, if a
These
cat
are the
has nine,
famous last words, John, because you
I
know that Vincenzo, we did the same speech a few weeks ago, and that's what got Ivan Juric sacked. Is
yes,
Bologna
if
completely dominating Roma at the Stadio Olimpico, crushing us, and Juric leaving like 5 minutes after the final whistle.
uh, which I know I mentioned it on podcast. Whether you find it funny, humorous, or a bit brash, dark, cold-hearted, cold-blooded, uh, Juric getting the sack before he even walks into the dressing room is there's humor, there's a bit of levity in that. There is also some hated metaphor about the greater sort of the rot at the inner portions of Roma that goes very deep. That again, I'm not clever enough to think of something on the spot here, but it was an interesting approach of the freaking group in that regard. But still, it doesn't matter. Here's the thing: Roma can be as shit as they are. That doesn't just because that is the case. That doesn't mean that all of these teams over here are suddenly good, or there's no room to talk. Like two things can be true at the same time, and this is where my frustration tends to come out, because Roma, being as shit as they have been this season, has given everybody else a pass. I mean, everyone. For Paulo Fonseca to last as long as he did at Milan, I mean, he somehow eclipsed, as we all know, agent Rudi Garcia, who he didn't even make it to the new year with Napoli. I thought Milan were just as bad as the defending champions Napoli of last season, but he was still able to just clandestinely earn more time and stay there longer and longer before eventually getting the axe. Still, this Roma is facing a team in Bologna who resemble nothing of the Bologna of last season. When it comes to Italiano, you can score 10 on any of his teams. Now, granted, they can also do the same to you because he was he in charge of Fiorentina at the time when they did that against Eusebio Di Francesco?
No,
I
that
can't
was Stefano
remember.
Pioli.
Oh, well, of course
it was even worse, from bald guy to bald guy.
Wow. Which, by the way, our friend Eusebio Di Francesco, who, when I say good friend, I've said it time and time again because we make fun of him a lot. He is a fantastically and just so dangerously nice that you almost feel guilty every time you speak a bad word of him. How about him hanging on with Venezia, bottom of the
Pretty
table?
incredible. I didn't. I mean, yeah, I didn't. I didn't expect him to last this long. I think it's just a matter of circumstances that he hasn't been fired. But good for him, And
Yeah, listen,
good for
yes.
him.
Hey,
Serie A is better off with guys like Di Francesco still around, and Giampaolo. Di
yes,
Francesco and Giampaolo. You feel, oh my god,
Giampaolo.
you're like, oh my god, is it 2016? Have I just
Giampaolo.
graduated from university? Wow, this is so great.
Yeah, Luca Toni is still the top scorer of Serie A. Yeah,
Yeah.
here's the thing: Bologna are not good. They aren't. Um,
Yeah, but the
this
question is
is
always, are you going to be
it,
good enough in their own home? That's
it,
it. And we've seen this
correct.
team.
It's never on the opponent. Yeah,
We've seen this
the only
team
time it's
get
ever on the
completely
opponent is
squashed
Inter,
by Como.
Atalanta.
We've seen them get completely squashed by Como in a matter of 10 minutes. Okay, they completely
Yes.
lost the plot against Como just because they were not playing in front of their fans. So I have no reason to believe that this team, after getting an important victory in the derby, will go out there and play with that same kind of aggressiveness and kind of mentality that really gave us an edge against Lazio. I will not believe in that because this team has failed to do it time and time again. The fact that Ranieri is on the sidelines makes me think, well, maybe this time, but still, it's. I just think that it's quite painful what Roma have put us through in 2024. Hopefully, in 2025 they change this trend. They give us more reasons to believe that they can go to the Dallara and they can get a win, which should be a perfectly normal thing to do for a club like Roma.
You would think so, but of course, as you sort of laid out there, it is a fool's errand as to predict and give any sort of supposition on what you think Roma will be doing at the weekend. But when it comes to this Bologna team, again, Roma, they have been very shit. So they have, just by way of that, made all of the chatter on all of the other clubs sort of go by the wayside. But this Bologna, let's see. Let's just go down the list. So they earn a draw 1-1 against Atalanta.
John, are we really gonna do this?
But here, just hold on. These are just very quickly before we go. But this is sort of the stuff we're dealing with. So they're coming off a 3-2 home defeat to Verona. Prior to that, they beat Torino. They beat Fiorentina. They earned a draw somehow in Portugal, which I subjected myself to in the Champions League, 0-0. It was about as fascinating as the score would suggest. They earned another draw against Juventus before that. They beat Di Francesco's Venezia 3-0, but then prior to that, they lose to Lazio. They beat Roma at the Olimpico. It's up and down. They've also, it's so bizarre to me. They've also drawn against Empoli. They've drawn against Udinese, Como. Now, again, it's not as if Roma has much room to talk. I think I mentioned this a couple of episodes ago. Do not look at Roma's record against the teams below them in the table. It's not pretty. But this is not a good Bologna side. That is straight. That is the only thing I'm trying to say. This Bologna team is shit. Roma, go out there, get the victory. I know you said at the Dallara they should be straightforward. It's hardly ever straightforward. I am always taken back to Santander, a guy who made like 95 appearances or something for Bologna, a forward who doesn't score goals, 95 appearances with like 2 goals. I think one of the two or 2 of 2 were against Roma. Stuff you can't make up. That's the sort of stuff Roma treat us to when they travel to this place. You've mentioned your relatives buried at the cemetery just outside of the stadium. There has to be some sort of greater force at play beyond that, because every time they go there, they struggle. It is never straightforward. Let's build on the derby, yeah? That would be nice. Get the second one in a row. And that is the thing. It doesn't seem like it would be a big deal. Oh, 2 wins in a row. But man, just the slightest bit of momentum.
It would be huge. It would be bigger than getting the derby win.
It would. It does not seem like it would be this season-altering sort of result. But all it takes is just the slightest bit of momentum to be able to build and to get something positive, which to date, there have been very few this season. Hopefully Roma can do that. We will be back after the match. Until then, ciao.
Ciao.